India-Australia relations have been on upswing for quite some time now. For the last so many years, there has been an increase in exchange of visits at the highest level. There have been people-to-people contacts that have increased, and going forward, it looks like it's a win-win situation for both the countries. But what are the driving forces in this relationship, and where does the current status of the relationship stand? To know all that, we are fortunate to have with us Australia's High Commissioner to India, Ms. Harinder Sidhu, who's agreed to talk to us on the status of the relationship, and also where does she see the strategic partnership going forward. Welcome to this program. This is for Strategic News International and bharatshakti.in, two of our websites here. As you sit here, and you've been here for almost 3 years now.
That's right.
How do you see the status of the relationship between the two countries?
Well, thank you very much, Nitin. It's a real pleasure to see you again and to talk to you. I think you're exactly right. I think Australia-India relations are probably at the strongest point than it has been for a very long time. And I think that while we've come a long way, there's a lot more we can do together. We continue to discover more and more points of convergence, more and more commonalities, and our shared interests, if anything, are becoming deeper and wider than they have been in the past. We predominantly have taken things forward in the strategic relationship. We are seeing a very high tempo of dialogues, exchanges, military engagements, and operations, and not operations but exercises. There is a high level of confidence and trust we've built between our two countries in the last 2 or 3 years.
Sure.
The second driving force is the people-to-people ties, which you've also mentioned: education, tourism, the whole dimensions of Indians traveling to Australia for various reasons, but also Australians coming to India and engaging with India. We're seeing a real increase in that. And I think what we're working to doing now is to draw those threads together to deepen the economic relationship, which is quite healthy, but I think there's certainly a lot of scope to expand on that.
But I mean, in that context, it's very interesting that you last week, I think you launched the Australia Fest, 6-month-long festival of arts and music and what have you. So what was the idea behind that fest?
Yes, so Australia Fest is very exciting. I'm so pleased you mentioned that. We're going to be putting on 75 events in over 20 cities over a 6-month period till March 2019. And what we want to do is to really take forward the idea that for two countries to develop a relationship, for us to do business together or to have a strategic partnership, we first have to understand each other. And the window to understanding is through these cultural relations. And when I say cultural relations, what we did in Ozfest, in Australia Fest, when we designed it, was to say, well, often these cultural festivals stay in the realm of what I call high art, you know, theatre and you know, high-level music and literature, and we have all those things.
And limited to elites sometimes, most of the time,
So we knew we had all those things.
True.
But then what we thought is, well, actually the things that connect people go far beyond that.
Sure.
It goes to sport, it goes to food and wine. I mean, Indians and Australians love our food. We have children's theatre. We have science and innovation exchanges. So we're doing a very wide range. We're taking culture in the very broadest sense of the word to develop that understanding.
And that's a very good thing because it's informal, and more people get drawn in, I suppose.
That's right.
That's the idea, I think.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Because as you mentioned, and as I also experienced when I went at your invitation in June, there are more and more Indian visitors going to Australia and going to not just the usual city tours, but also trying to do the adventure sport, the adventure tourism. So in that sense, tourism is one big driver, I guess, but the other is education. And would you like to elaborate on how education is sort of driving this relationship?
Yes, well, education, I think, is a centerpiece of the relationship. You know, I often say that the people-to-people links will be the defining feature of our relationship, and it's shown through the educational relationship. So not only do we have steadily increasing numbers of Indian students going to Australia to study, there's a growing recognition in India about the high quality of Australian education, so much so that the numbers of students grew by 25% in the last year. We now have nearly 80,000 students in Australia. It's a very significant group. But we're not stopping there. We're actually also building institution to institution collaboration so we can share our knowledge and expertise, so we can pool faculty and teaching resources so that we can expand out the reach of the education side. We're working on skilling and vocational training. We really are working to develop that because India has educational demands across the spectrum.
True.
But the other side of education is that there is virtually no other sector of economic engagement where education or skilling or training doesn't play a part. And so if we are talking about our engagement, say, in the agriculture sector, well, joint research on agriculture is a dimension of that.
Exactly,
the same goes with mining. So we see that education has a role in just about everything we do within India.
Right. In mining, I think you do something with the Dhanbad-based
We established
Indian Institute of Mining.
That's
there.
right. So we have an Australia-India mining partnership that we established a couple of years ago at Dhanbad, and we have now a joint PhD program between the IIT ISM and Curtin University, and other universities are drawing into that as well. But equally, we have Australian mining companies and equipment and technology is also being shared through that process.
True.
So it's a lovely three-dimensional story of what you can do.
That's great. In fact, that's why I said that education is a driving force. But also, I think of late you've also concentrated on increasing the defense cooperation.
Yes.
And how's that shaping up?
Well, I would have to say that's pretty much the jewel in the crown on that. Look, for two countries to build defence cooperation says a lot about the level at which they trust each other.
Right.
And this year, every year we've seen a steady uptick in the tempo of the work we do. We've had 2 rounds of our Navy to Navy exercises, AusIndex. For the first time, the Indian Navy participated in exercise Kakadu this year, which was fantastic. But we were really delighted, especially that the Indian Air Force participated in exercise Pitch Black. These are big multilateral exercises. Yeah. We were so delighted, actually, that they did that. We see that as the start of something really important. We have Special Forces exercises. This year alone, we're going to see all 3 defence services having joint talks. We'll be seeing the next 2+2 defence and foreign secretaries meeting with Australians just next week. So there's a lot of activity going on. And the more we do these exercises, the more we engage together, the better we get at it. The more comfortable we are with each other. Right. That can only be good for regional security and international security, that India is engaging, not just with Australia, but I know with many other countries as well.
So that brings me to Indo-Pacific, which is now the flavor of the season, or maybe many seasons to come.
Yeah.
But where do you see India and Australia converging in their strategic thoughts as far as Indo-Pacific is concerned?
Yeah, so Australia, I know everyone thinks Indo-Pacific only arrived yesterday, but we've been using the phrase Indo-Pacific for, nearly a decade now.
True. In fact, I think it's the Australian Prime Minister then, I think, who initially initiated this term, Kevin Rudd, if I remember correctly. And
it was a function of us finally waking up, I think, and probably came a bit late to it, but thankfully we've come to it. Recognizing that Australia is a country that faces the Pacific Ocean and the Indian Ocean. True. And if we're looking at what is really Australia's region, it is the Indo-Pacific region. So we see that the Indo-Pacific is the region where most of the world's economic growth over the next 20 or 30 years is going to take place.
Yes.
It is a region of rising powers. It is a region of great energy and activity, but it's also a region where there's likely to be a lot more strategic push and pull.
True.
So we have to be vigilant about that, and it's going to be very important for us to work with partners, and as I've already said, partners such as India, where we have a high level of convergence. I think if you have to talk about what the convergences are, it's fair to say that India and Australia have always looked at the world in very similar ways. The things we care about, democracy, rule of law, freedom of movement,
multicultural society.
Exactly, you know, human rights, all those things are things that actually we've always shared.
Sure.
We've never really talked about it, we kind of took it for granted, really.
Exactly.
But these are things that are becoming important in setting the strategic frame in our region. And the more we can work with countries that share those values, the better chance we have of preserving that for the benefit of us all. It's not for Australia's alone or India's alone. It really is about the regional benefit.
Yeah. So in that context, I think quadrilateral arrangement, or the Quad as we call it popularly, is also going to be important.
Yes, I think so. The Quad is like many other plurilateral arrangements we have in the region. I think what we've found is that the world is more agile and faster moving now than it was in the past. Probably for the Indo-Pacific, it's not reasonable to have one big regional security architecture.
That's right.
We are needing to do things in small groups.
Right.
So we have Australia, India, Japan trilateral, Australia, India, Indonesia trilateral, and then we throw the Quad in as one of that. And if you see what is the common feature of all of those, it is countries that see the world in similar ways, that can share their perspectives and build confidence with each other. So that's really why we see it.
That's how it is. So is that one of the reasons why countries like Australia, South Korea, Taiwan are diversifying their dependence of trade on China, because China is becoming increasingly assertive, increasingly also pushing its way into areas where countries feel uncomfortable, but therefore your India economic strategy, is it also one way of hedging your bets for the future?
So I think we need to sort of unpick the assumptions you have in that question.
Yeah.
There are a set of concerns we have about some of China's strategic behavior, which we have been very vocal and open about and talked about that in many different forums. On the economic side, China is by far Australia's largest trading partner. And China's rise has for Australia been an unmitigatedly good thing, because it has really done great things for our economy. It's a deeply complementary economic relationship. But as the economic strategy says, you can't put all your eggs in too few baskets.
Right.
So the desire for economic diversification is driven more out of risk management and economic common sense than driven by strategic concern.
So they're not yet related fully.
Yeah. I mean, they're probably mildly related, but in fact you have to see them in two different spaces. To mix them up, I think, would be to tell the wrong story.
Right. But so standalone itself, the India economic strategy makes sense. And I think you were back in Australia for a road show, or many road shows perhaps to the States. How did that go? How did people receive it there?
Yeah, well, as you know, the India economic strategy was written for an Australian audience.
Right.
And it really aims to do a couple of things. One is to raise India literacy in Australia, to deepen the understanding about the prospects in India. And the second thing that it's doing is to map a path for Australian businesses to do business in India. I have to say, I travelled to 6 cities, virtually every capital city in Australia, in 10 days. And I was struck by how positive the response was. I think it has come at a time exactly when we are looking at economic diversification. It's providing an answer to a question that many in the Australian government, various Australian governments and businesses are asking. How do we get into India? How do we diversify? And so it was the right report at the right time. We had incredible engagement. I was holding public meetings where there was standing room only. It was truly an incredible experience.
That's great to hear.
Yeah.
So finally, one small observation about India, Australia. One of the things that unites and divides us both is cricket. So what's your prediction of the upcoming series in Australia?
What do you think it would be?
So let's wait for it to happen.
Yes, absolutely. I'll put money on it.
Okay, great. Commissioner, thank you very much for your time.
Lovely
It's
to
a
talk to
pleasure.
you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you.